Hello guys, thank you so much for coming back to watch another video on my channel. Now if you have been playing recent Resident Evil titles, you already know who Jack Baker, Lady Dimitrescu and Mr. X is, and these are the best part of the recent Resident Evil titles, which will be called a stalker enemy. So that's why I've made this video as to why I think Capcom needs to add this a stalker type enemy for the next mainline Resident Evil 9. So let's find out together as to why. Now, as I always ask you guys, that if you do watch this video and you do like this content I've made for you, then please do make sure to subscribe to my channel. It would help me to make more of these videos for you guys. Now, Capcom has quite recently known for making these stalker enemies, and this has been the biggest part of the recent Resident Evil titles. Whether you play Resident Evil 7, Resident Evil 2 Remake, Resident Evil Village, all of these games have this sort of a stalker enemy which stalk you throughout the game, either from the beginning to the end. Now, this is a feature which has recently gained a more popularity thanks to the games which has arrived before Resident Evil, which has elevated this sort of a genre. However, Capcom has already done this before with Resident Evil 2. Now in Resident Evil 2, yes, there is a very short moment, a sequence where you see Mr. X who chases you, and you can entirely skip that moment. But then it elevated in Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. Now this was the game which actually became popular because of Nemesis, how it pursues Jill Valentine throughout the Raccoon City. I remember when I played Resident Evil 3, and this was the best feature and best part of the whole game. It was actually known Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, and Nemesis become a quite popular figure into the Resident Evil franchise. Now after the debacle of Resident Evil 6, Capcom wasn't sure as where to take this franchise because they've moved the dynamics from a survival horror to an action horror game, and at the same time fans weren't pleased with what Capcom is doing with the Resident Evil franchise, and they wanted them to go back to the survival horror roots which was introduced by the Resident Evil 1. Capcom decided to actually listen to the fans, and they decided to make Resident Evil 7 a sort of a soft reboot, and they introduced this a stalker type enemy in the form of Jack Baker. Now Jack Baker is a relentless monster who chases you from the very start of the game. Now as soon as you turn on Resident Evil 7 and you play the first hour, within that first hour there is a sense of dread and helplessness from your main character because you can't fight back. Jack Baker continues to pursue you throughout the main house. As you make it through the safe room and you think you're safe just for the time being, but the Jack Baker is still there. He continues to chase you and he taunts you, which is kind of funny and scary.
Thought you'd just slip out before dinner was done? God damn! How am I going to replace this? Ethan? Ethan? Ethan?
It was such a great cat and mouse chase scene where Jack is constantly chasing you while you're trying to explore the main house. You're trying to find these puzzle elements, you're trying to explore what's actually going on, while you're also keeping an eye and listening for the footsteps of Jack Baker, because he makes sure that you know his presence, and he lets you know about his presence through his slow footsteps and constant reminder and constantly taunting you that there is no escape for you. Now the beautiful part for Resident Evil 7 is that you have the choice that you can actually fight him, but the fight would lead to nothing. It'll buy you some time where you can actually go and explore it, but he'll eventually come back and he'll chase you again. And that's where the freedom comes in, where you have the choice. You have a very limited resource which you can use to fight him, or you can save that and constantly try to hide from him, and you will constantly find a way out of his sight where you can actually explore the puzzle elements so you can move on to your next objective. Now if you ask anyone who played Resident Evil 7, the best part for Resident Evil 7 was actually where Jack Baker was constantly chasing you throughout the main house. And this was the best feature added by Capcom. I think it was brilliant what they did. I know there were problems with Resident Evil 7 with the type of enemy variety which wasn't added. However, Jack Baker was the best part of Resident Evil 7. Then Capcom moved on to Resident Evil 2 Remake, and Resident Evil 2 Remake for me personally is the best Resident Evil game just because of Mr. X. Now Mr. X's presence is different to Jack Baker. He is also a stalker enemy, but in this way he's constantly chasing you and his hard footsteps can be heard from a miles away, and you know when he's chasing you, approaching you, you have to run because otherwise he'll catch you. He has that sort of a Terminator vibe where he's actually doesn't talk to you, he doesn't taunt you, and he just pursues you straight on. He's a silent antagonist, and even if you try to fight him in the same scenario as they did with Resident Evil 7, you can either waste your ammo, which will buy you some time, or you can hide away and try to explore while trying to hide from Mr. X in the RPD station. You're trying to be very careful that you don't make any noise through your gun because the zombies are still there. You want to kill them, but you know if you made any sound, Mr. X would chase you throughout the RPD station until you go to the safe room. Now this was brilliant what Capcom did with them two enemy types, and that was the best part of Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 2 Remake, because they had this adaptive AI where it has the freedom to follow you. Wherever you make a sound or noise, the stalker enemy will make sure it goes to that point. It might take a minute or two, and at that point you have a bit time where you can explore it, wait for the stalker enemy to arrive, or you can run away, buy some more time. This is very good backtracking which has been done with these two games. Then we move on to Resident Evil 8 Village. Again, for me, the best part was Lady Dimitrescu when she chases you throughout the castle, and the castle was actually the best part of Resident Evil 8 Village. There's another chase scene for a stalker enemy where there's a giant baby trying to chase you, try to run away. These literally were the scariest parts of the Resident Evil 8 Village because it's more action than survival horror. However, the best parts were actually these two stalker enemies, which is brilliantly been added, even though it was short-lived. Now they also tried to do that stalker enemy with Resident Evil 3 Remake, but it didn't have that sort of adaptive AI feature, and it was more scripted, which that's why people didn't enjoy as much. But I think the pacing in Resident Evil 3 Remake was more fast-paced compared to Resident Evil 2 Remake, so Mr. X made more sense in Resident Evil 2 Remake. Now for a stalker enemy to work, it had to have that slow, dreaded horror theme into the game, and the pacing has to work for the stalker enemy to work in that game. And I think Resident Evil 7, Resident Evil 2 Remake perfectly nailed that setting, which allowed the stalker enemy to work within that confined and that environment. Now that's what I want Capcom to do, that take the best features from Resident Evil 7, Resident Evil 2 Remake or Resident Evil Village and put that into the perspective and make that game as a more survival horror than action themed game. They already done a remake of Resident Evil 4 Remake, and it's not a survival horror game, it's more actiony, but I love that game, and a stalker enemy in that game wouldn't work due to the pacing, so it made sense that they didn't do that and they just followed the original path and just remade the original game by adding new features, which I think worked, and Resident Evil 4 Remake turned out to be one of the best remakes ever. However, with the mainline Resident Evil 9 title, they have to have that slow, dreaded theme to it, and if they do a stalker enemy which would be in the same feature as Jack Baker, it has to be original and they have to put more effort into it. I think it would elevate Resident Evil 9 and it would actually be one of the best Resident Evil titles. What do you guys think? This is just my opinion, and I think this would elevate Resident Evil 9 by adding the stalker enemy. What do you guys think? Please do let me know in the comment section down below in this video, and I'll catch you again with another video on my channel. Until then, look after yourself. Have a good one.